Hi. How's everybody doing today? Excellent, excellent. Me too. It's always great when I do one of these presentations where it only takes about 10 steps of me walking down the hall from my office to get to the presentation. Usually I have to drive an hour or sometimes farther. I've done this program in Florida and 6 or 7 other states as well. But nice to have you come to me this time instead of me going out on the road. Now, when I do this program, I go out and I talk a little bit about history, talk a little bit about science, talk a little bit about electricity. But when I talk about history, for instance, I don't like to just talk about history. I like to live a little bit of history. So with that in mind, I need your help. I need you to wipe away from your mind everything that you know about the 1900s and the 2000s. And I'd like you to come back with me to my favorite year, which is 1889. I'd like you to think a little bit about how your life would be different if you were living in 1889. Of course, the university would just sort of be in its infancy. People just beginning to think about the university at that point in time. Think about transportation, how you get around from place to place if you were living in 1889. And ladies, I'm not going any farther than this. Think about politics. The president would be Benjamin Harrison. Think about all those things that would make your life different if you were living in 1889, because, ladies and gentlemen, we're there. And the real reason I've been invited here today is to talk to you a little bit about inventing, and to talk a little bit about inventions, and to talk about inventors. But mostly I've been invited here today to talk about my very favorite subject of them all, me. Yes, Thomas Alva Edison. You've heard of me, of course, right? Nod your heads. You're doing well. Excellent. Good. Now, today, being 1889, we really need to go back a little farther. We're going to go back to my beginnings, February 11th, 1847. I'm the youngest of 7 children in my family. My mom is Nancy. She's a school teacher. My father is Sam, and he owns a hardware store. And I think the best way to get started is simply to tell you that I was a curious little kid. And it was that curiosity that led me to become an inventor. For instance, when I was 3, I was very curious about chickens. How is it that chickens can hatch eggs? That's what I wanted to know. And so I walked around to the barns in my neighborhood. May I borrow your chicken eggs? Thank you. I walked around to the barns in my neighborhood. I need yours too. And thank you very much. I collected all the chicken eggs I could find, and I put them in a nice little nest. And as any normal 3-year-old would do, I, of course, then proceeded to sit on them. And I sat on those chicken eggs for 12 hours that day because I was convinced that I was better than the chickens. I figured if the chickens can sit on the eggs and make them hatch, then so could I. And so I sat there. And at the end of 12 hours, I slowly got up and I looked around, and lo and behold, ladies and gentlemen, I had yolk all over my pants. Not a very successful experiment. But that didn't stop me from being curious. In fact, when I was 5 years old, I was very curious about flying. I wanted to see if I could make my best friend fly. And it made an important observation. You probably have too. You all are familiar with antacid tablets, right? Put it in a glass of water, what happens? It fizzes. Where do the bubbles go? Up. Well, they go up. Yes, they do. I decided to use this information for my flying experiment. Here's what I did. I got my best friend, and I held him down because I didn't want him to fly too fast. And then I fed him huge quantities of antacid tablets. I crammed them in his face, stuffed them down his throat. When he said, I gave him some more. And then I let him go. Because I figured that when it got down into his belly, it was going to start to mix around with the juices in his stomach. And just like in the glass of water, it was going to start to bubble and fizz. And I figured just like in the glass of water, the bubbles would start to rise. And they'd rise up from his belly and up to his chest and up to his throat and up to his face and up to his head. And when they got up that high, they would keep on rising and lift him right up off the ground. It was going to be a spectacular experiment. Except, instead of making my best friend go up, it made my best friend throw up. Not a very successful experiment. But I was still 5. I was still curious about flying, and I made another important observation. I noticed, of course, that birds fly, and I noticed that birds eat what? Bird seed, bugs. What do birds eat? Worms. That was the answer I was looking for. Because when I was 5, I was convinced It was the worms that made the birds fly. Yes, you know what's coming next, don't you? Yes, I got my best friend. He didn't want to play with me anymore. I got my other best friend. It was a little girl. She was 4.5 years old. I convinced her to eat a plate full of mashed worms because I told her it was going to make her fly, and the best part of it was she threw up too. Yeah. Not a very successful experiment. But when I was 6, that's when I got down to some serious work. That's when I did my very first experiment with electricity. Not a smart move, as you can imagine. We all know the dangers of electricity. I was mostly interested in that electricity that happens when you rub your feet on a rug, you touch something metal. We call that static electricity, of course. When I was 6, I wanted to make static electricity. And here's what I did. I wired the tails of 2 cats together, and I rubbed the cats' bodies together, and they got a spark. I was so excited. It was my very first successful experiment. I made electricity using cats. Thank you very much. Yeah, the cats weren't too happy, as you can imagine. I tell you these silly stories to get us started off here this afternoon, simply to point out that I was a curious little kid who conducted experiments and learned something. That's what I did as a child. I was curious, I did experiments, I learned something. That's all I was doing at that point in time, and that's still what I'm doing today as an inventor. Now, when I was 7, my family moved. This so far has all taken place in Ohio. And we moved when I was 7 to Michigan. And it was there that I went to school the very first time at age 8. Yes, 8. And, well, just 3 months later, I got the boot. I got kicked out of school, and I never ever got to go back. I really wanted to learn, but I was a disruption. I made noise. I asked questions at the wrong time. I generally disturbed everybody else's education. And so they sent me away. They said I wasn't able to learn, but that wasn't really it at all. Luckily, my mother, Nancy, was a school teacher, and she taught me everything at home. We had lessons every day at home, and my friends had lessons all together at school. And one nice thing that my mom did for me, though, was she bought me a chemistry set. She bought me test tubes and beakers and Bunsen burners and chemicals of all sorts. And I'd mix things together and learn about science and chemistry. It's a lot of fun. But, well, you can probably guess I spilled a few things, and I broke a few things, and I used up a lot of equipment. I needed some more. I asked my mother if she'd buy me some more equipment for my chemistry set, and she looked at me and she said, Alva! Oh, I forgot to tell you. Everybody always calls me by my middle name, Alva. You can too. That's okay. But she said, Alva, the most important thing is to work, which was her way of telling me to get a job. If you want some money if you want to buy another chemistry set, get a job and earn the money yourself. And that's what I did. I was 12, but I got a job working on the trains, selling newspapers and candy and fruit and other things to the passengers on the train. Good job. But I was kind of late one day. You can picture me with an armful of newspapers over here, another armful of candy and fruit, and I'm strolling down to the train station. Dum-de-dum-de-dum. And I got there, but the train I was supposed to be on had already begun to pull away from the platform. And so I took off running as fast as I possibly could to catch up to that train. And I caught up to the train, but with my arms full, I couldn't pull myself up onto the car while it was still going. So finally the conductor, he noticed me, and he leaned down to pull me up onto the train, and he pulled me up by my ears. And you can just sort of picture me dangling off the edge of the train with the large man's hands on my ears and the ground going by underneath my feet, and finally gave me one last yank, and he lifted me up onto that train. But unfortunately, when he did so, I heard this awful crackling sound. And it was one of the last sounds that I heard really well. I was 15 at that time, and well, things weren't looking too good at that point. You know, the hearing seemed to be going bad and getting worse. But the good news, it didn't stop me from doing my job on the train. Didn't stop me from doing my experiments. In fact, I wanted to do an even better job on the train by printing up my own newspaper. I had found a printing press in the baggage compartment of the train. What else, ladies and gentlemen, do I need to make a newspaper besides a printing press? Anybody? Paper, ink, news. We customers, yeah, we need customers too. But news, what good is a newspaper with no news in it? It just so happens that today, as you know, in 1889, the way that the news travels from place to place is across the wires of the telegraph machine. At each train station, there's a telegraph operator tapping out the dots and dashes of the Morse code, sending those coded messages on wires that parallel the train tracks to the telegraph operator at the next train station. So, since I worked on the trains, I got off the train at each stop. I collected up the news stories from the telegraph operators. I got back on the train and used that information for my newspaper. It became the first and the last and the only newspaper in history ever to have been printed on a moving train. I was a businessman. I was a newspaper publisher at age 16. Not a bad start. But who remembers why I got the job on the train in the first place? Anybody? I needed money for my chemistry set, exactly right. Problem was that I was on the train from 7 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. It didn't give me any time to do my experiments. So I moved my chemistry set from my basement at home and I put it on the back of the train. I didn't tell anybody, and I figured it was just going to be fine, and it was. I would do my experiments when work was slow. I'd hide everything behind the curtain and go back to work when I needed to do that. Everything was just fine. Just fine. Well, we had one little problem. I blew up the caboose. Yeah, it was a little bigger than a little problem. It was definitely a problem. And of course, the conductor had to figure out what was going on, and he realized it was me, and he gave me the boot. He kicked me off the train, never to return. I'm famous now, and they still won't let me back on the train. But I liked that train, and I liked that telegraph machine I had begun to learn a little bit about. So I would hang around the train station anyway, just talking to people, learning as much as I could. And I noticed one day that there was a little boy, about 3 years old, who was playing on the tracks. And he didn't see that a train was zooming down the rails. And so I jumped off the platform, pulled the boy out of the way, just barely in time to save his life. We were so close to being run over that day that the train actually knocked the heel right off of my shoe. But I saved him. And I was a hero even. And it just so happens that that little boy was John Mackenzie. And it was his father, John Mackenzie, who was the one who operated the telegraph machine in that train station. And he was so happy that I saved his son's life that he gave me a job. He offered to teach me how to operate that telegraph machine, how to send those coded messages across the wires, how to receive and decode messages when they come into us. Pretty good job. But I was still a kind of sneaky little teenager at the time, and I had one nice little idea, one sneaky little idea left. I wanted to see if I could become the world's fastest telegraph message sender there ever was, for one and only one purpose, and that was so that I could confuse the man at the other end of the wire I was sending my messages to. So I tap out long, complicated messages and send them quickly across the wires, and in a minute, I got a message back in code that said, huh? I love that. So I tapped out another long, complicated message and sent it quickly across the wires. And it took him 2 or 3 minutes before he responded. And he responded with a message saying, huh? It was perfect. I was just loving it. I did it a few more times until the man at the other end of the wire figured out how to decode my speedy, confusing messages. And what was worse was he figured out how to send me speedy, confusing messages. And what was worse than that was with my hearing problem, all I could do was send him back a message that said, you know, yes, caught in my own trap once again. I seem to be really good at that, aren't I? I'm really good at creating these problems for myself. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I decided this time I was going to solve the problem by creating my very first invention. I was 18 years old, and I created a device called the telegraph repeater, a machine that allowed us to store a message on a separate wire so we could play it back later at a slower speed. And that resolved my problem of not being able to decode the message fast enough. I showed it to my boss. He liked it. We used it in the office for a while until I discovered that this machine also allowed me to take a nap on the job. Just go to sleep. I figured I could let the machine pick up all the messages. I'd get the messages later when I woke up. You've done that, right? I know you have. Well, the problem was that one of the messages said, 2 trains are about to collide. Do something. I was, of course, sleeping. Luckily, somebody else got the message, took care of the problem. There was no collision. I got The boot, yes. Kicked out of school, fired for my first 2 jobs. Things were not looking too good for old Thomas Edison at that point in time. And so I left. It was time for me to leave. I figured it. I was 18. I was had still been in Michigan. It was time for me to go. And I left and went to Lexington, Kentucky, and then to Cincinnati, and to Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., and Boston, Massachusetts, trying to travel it around, learn more about that telegraph machine, interest people in buying my telegraph repeater. And then I got to New York City, 1869, so I was 22 years old, not a penny to my name, but I had a friend who agreed to put an ad in the newspaper for me, Thomas Edison, inventor. And I heard from a man at a company called the Gold Stock Ticker Company. He wanted me to fix his stock ticker machine. I, of course, told him I would. I didn't tell him that I didn't have a clue what a stock ticker machine was, but I went to work. And in 3 weeks' time, I improved that machine. I fixed it. I did exactly what he wanted, what he needed. He was thrilled with me. He said, "Mr. Edison, how much do I owe you?" I didn't know. I'd never been paid for an invention before. I had no idea what a stock ticker was worth. So I said, "Pay me whatever you think it's worth." In the back of my mind, I was hoping for $300. That would have been nice. But I said, "Pay me what you think it's worth," and the man wrote me off a check, and I stuffed it in my pocket. And when he wasn't looking, I took a quick glance at that check, and it was not for $300. It was instead for $40,000. Yeah, exactly. Woo! 1869. I was 22, and I got a check for $40,000. Can you imagine? I could have retired right there, put my feet up on my desk, and taken a nap for 60 years. But I didn't want to do that, of course. I had all these ideas running through my head, projects I wanted to work on, inventions I wanted to invent. And so I took that $40,000, and in 6 months' time, I spent every penny. And I spent it all on building an invention factory, a complex of buildings where we could supply it with the best equipment we could find, hire the smartest people around, and start to invent whatever we wanted to invent. We set a goal for ourselves of inventing something important every 6 months for the rest of our lives. And we went to work. And one of the first projects we got involved with was that telegraph machine. Made some improvements there. And then we got into some trouble with this other guy. You've heard of him, Alexander Graham Bell. Thinks he's the greatest inventor of all time. I know that I'm the greatest inventor of all time, so you can imagine we're going to butt heads a little bit. He was working on this telephone gizmo and having some problems, and I decided I was going to jump into the middle of his project and make improvements on his invention just to show him who's boss. And that's what I did. You see, Mr. Bell's phone, the piece you speak into, was the same piece you listened from. That was his first version. You speak and you listen, and you speak and you listen, and you speak and you listen. Well, I decided to separate the mouthpiece from the earpiece, make it a little more convenient to operate. And then, more important than that, Mr. Bell's telephone was only a useful invention if everybody you ever wanted to talk to lived next door. If they lived any farther away than that and they couldn't hear you, what good is a phone if you can't hear the other party? So I invented a transmitter that goes inside every single phone to give the voice unlimited power over long distances. So yes, you could talk to somebody next door, but also down the street, in the next town, in the next state even. That made the telephone a useful and practical invention. All right, now, one other story I sometimes tell about the telephone before we get on to the big 3 inventions. We see, what's the first thing you all say when you pick up the phone? I invented hello. Thank you very much. So here's the story. So Mr. Bell, when he was doing his telephone experiments, he would say, "Are you receiving my message?" That'd be the first thing he'd say when he picked up the phone. "Are you receiving my message?" That sounds like a mouthful to me. So I decided to start using a French word, and the French word means greetings, which is a nice thing to say in the phone when you pick it up, greetings. But the French word is pronounced allo, so I said that in the phone, allo, and the guy at the other end of the wire, who was just in the next room, because we were still experimenting, he thought that I said hello, which in the 1870s was not a word in the English language. But that's what he thought I said, so that's what he figured he should say back. So he said hello. Well, with my hearing problem, I thought that he said allo, and I figured, oh, we're just going to talk French for a while. He thought that's what I wanted them to say. So he started to spread it around to the office. He told everybody at the office, if you're going to talk to the boss on the phone, use this new word, hello. That's what he wants you to use. Which, of course, wasn't at all what I wanted them to use, but that's what I thought I wanted them to use, so that's what they used. It got worse from there. They started to spread it around to everybody else in our families, to everybody in town, everybody in the state of New Jersey where we were doing our work started to use this new word, hello. I'm sorry. Apparently it's gotten here as well. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, but believe it or not, that is where hello comes from. All right, let's talk about the big three. I call them the big three because they're the three inventions I'm going to be the most famous for, the three inventions I'm going to make the most money from, the three inventions that I'm sure you know a little bit about, but maybe not quite as much as you think you do. So, number one of the big three, we call it the talking machine. At least that's how we started out calling it. It was originally devised as a business dictation device. But when I invented it, I learned that nobody wanted a business dictation device, so I put it on the shelf for a while. And, well, after a while, I had some opera singers who moved in down the street. I decided to test them out on this new device and had them record their voices, record their singing voices on this device. Of course, you know we're talking about the phonograph. Now, I got to tell you, the phonograph invention scared the daylights out of me because it worked the very first time I ever tried it. Most inventions take years of work, thousands of experiments. The phonograph worked the very first time I ever tried it. And that first recording on that first phonograph was actually made from a piece of almost like tinfoil from your kitchen. And it was wrapped around a cylinder. We didn't get to the flat round ones for a while. The very first recording on the very first phonograph was my voice singing, "Mary Had a Little Lamb." I wasn't expecting it to work the first time, so I didn't prepare anything profound. "Mary Had a Little Lamb" was what we got. All right. Do you know how it works? Do you know how the phonograph really worked? The objective really was to record our voice on this cylinder, on this tinfoil cylinder. Of course, our voices make vibrations in the air. So I set up this machine to record the vibrations. I set up a brand new piece of tinfoil wrapped around the cylinder. I put the needle on it. I spoke into it, "Mary had a little lamb." My voice made vibrations. The vibrations moved the needle. The needle made marks on the tinfoil. So later on, when we turned the machine on and the needle glided across the marks on the tinfoil, it made the same vibrations that my voice made. The phonograph, also known as the talking machine and the Victrola and all sorts of other things that you've heard about. That became the invention of all my inventions that I make the most money from, and it really changed the world of entertainment. You really couldn't, if you wanted to listen to music, you would have to have hired a band, found somebody who played some instruments, because there was no way of recording sound, recording music before that invention. Now, the number two invention of the big three, of course, is right here. And we know about this guy. I should tell you that the light bulb was not nearly as easy to invent as that phonograph was. The phonograph worked the first time. This did not work the first time. This did not work the 101st time, or the 1,001st time, or the 9,001st time. This was a tough one. And the hardest part about inventing the light bulb is the part we know is the filament. And you can see inside this bulb here the filament. You can see the two metal prongs sticking up inside the bulb, and across the top of that, that piece that has a little crook in it, that's the filament in this bulb. That's the part of the bulb that heats up and glows and gives off light when we turn on the electricity. The hard part was trying to figure out what material to use for that filament. What are we going to use that's going to heat up and glow for a long period of time without burning out? That is what took me 2 years and 9,000 experiments. And at the end of that time, we came up with the answer, which was tungsten. What an excellent answer if you're in the future. Because in 1879, when we were working on this invention, nobody knew much about tungsten. So actually, the first best filament material for the light bulb was bamboo. Bamboo, that plant grown mostly in China that panda bears eat. A little sliver of bamboo covered in carbon dust and used as a filament in the first light bulb, heated up and gave off light for 600 hours before burning out. Bamboo became the first best filament. Okay, here's where you all come in. I have one big question for you all. It has 10 answers. I need all 10 answers from all of you before we can continue. You didn't expect to come back to college and not have a quiz, did you? All right, so here we go.
Would you take 9?
9 might be okay. We'll see how it goes. All right, so in fact, I'll tell you, one of them is the light bulb. So therefore, you can still have 9 to go. All right, so I've invented the light bulb. It's a wonderful invention, but if I set it right here in the middle of the room, it will do absolutely nothing unless we hook it up to 9 other things. What are they? What do we have to invent? What do we have to attach to this bulb in some way to get the light bulb to work? We need a generator. We need a power plant. We need to generate electricity somehow. So clearly, the generator, the power plant, is one of those 9 inventions. What else do we need? We need wires going from where to where?
The generator
to wherever the bulb is. Yes, exactly. All right. So we have the power plant and the wires to bring that power to our home. What are we going to do with the light bulb? We're just going to sit here in the middle of the room? We need a lamp. We need to invent the first electric lamp. And we need the socket to be able to screw the bulb into. The bulb is going to be in the socket. What's coming from the lamp? We need another wire, exactly. What's at the end of the wire? A plug. Where's the plug going to go? I like that answer, thank you, because oftentimes people tell me it's in the wall, and I have to invent the wall. But no, you're right. You're right. We got a bulb and a socket and a lamp and a cord and a plug and an outlet. What are we missing?
connection to the wire outside.
Connection to the wires outside that goes to the power plant. We need that switch as well. The electric switch hadn't been invented yet. And those wires going to the power plant, those are just going to be lying in the street, right? Okay, now, poles. I like that. Now, here's a big challenging question for you. What, and we got to answer really quick, what do you call those poles?
Electric poles.
I like that answer, electric pole. Do you really say electric poles? Because everybody else probably said telephone poles. And you know that I don't really like Mr. Bell, so I don't want my pole to be named after Mr. Bell's invention. You do me a favor and do as this gentleman has and call them electric poles for the rest of your lives. I would really appreciate that. But you're right. All of those inventions, the bulb and the socket and the lamp and the cord and the plug and the outlet and the switch and the wires and the poles to the power plant, that whole system of equipment had to be invented in order to turn the light bulb on. It wasn't enough just to invent the light bulb. I had to invent the whole electric utility industry to get it to work. Okay. Now, number 3, if I can get this away, number 3 of the big 3 I'm working on right now, 1889. You all know about the camera, of course. If you took a picture of me standing up here and we got the pictures developed, it would be a picture of me standing up here, looking like this. I'm working on a new camera. A camera where if you took a picture of me standing up here going like this, the pictures will show me moving. What is this wonderful invention going to be called? The motion pictures, the movies. I should tell you, when I go to school classrooms and talk about this invention, they think that I'm inventing the DVD player. You guys know exactly what I'm talking. The motion pictures, the movies, and just like with the light bulb, where we had to invent a whole bunch of things to make the light bulb work, we have to invent a number of different things to make the movies work. Like what?
Film.
Film, yes. And? A projector, right. And? So we need the camera and the film to take the pictures. We need the projector and the screen to watch the pictures. All of those elements come together in order to get this light bulb to work. In order to get the motion pictures to work. In fact, you know what? I should tell you one more story about the motion pictures, about how it really came to be. You've heard of George Eastman, started the Eastman Kodak Company. He did an experiment at a horse racetrack. He set up 12 still cameras at the racetrack. Each one had a wire attached to it that went across the track, so that when horses galloped by, they kicked the wires as they're running by and automatically took a picture of themselves. When he put those 12 pictures in order and flipped through them like a child's flip book, it looked like the pictures were moving. That's how this motion picture idea came to be. He started with 12 still cameras to take essentially 1 second of movie film, and I condensed those 12 down to one camera with one long long, skinny strip of film to shoot pictures rapidly all in a row to make the movies work. That really was how this idea came to be, and again, we're still working on this to this day. Now, we're almost going to wrap up here. We got a couple more minutes to go. I know there's a couple questions out there, but before we do that, I do want to just mention, we've really only talked about 5 inventions here today. I don't want you to go home thinking those are the only things I've been working on. I want to give you a quick little rundown of a few other interesting projects that you might not be familiar with, and then we'll get to some questions and wrap up. I know you got some more activities today. So before we go, among the other things I've been working on, I've invented the first electric railroad, including a large-sized battery, storage battery for large vehicles like that. I invented the first electric typewriter. I invented the first electric pen. Actually, it was the earliest version of a mimeograph machine. I invented, remember that transmitter we talked about that goes in the phone so you could talk to somebody far away? Change that around, hold it in your hand, it becomes the first microphone. That's one of my projects. Here's one that people aren't familiar with. I invented Portland cement. Who would guess? Most people think of me as an electricity kind of guy. I invented Portland cement. And in fact, I even needed to create a reason why everybody needed to buy Portland cement. So I created a big mold, like a Jell-O mold, but a mold of a 2-story house. We set up the mold, you pour the cement in the top, you let it settle around, you take off the mold, you have a 2-story house. Made of, you're laughing, that's a good answer, because it was made of cement. Why did anybody want that? Nobody did, actually. But I actually had created this project of inventing this Portland cement because of another project that was kind of a flop. I was trying to create a device for separating, it was called a magnetic ore separator. If you're in the mining business and you want to separate out the valuable minerals from the rock, I created this big magnetic system that when you crush down the rock, the magnets would pull out the valuable minerals. After 3 years, it didn't work. And after 3 years, I had an awful lot of crushed rock, which ultimately led me to figure out what am I going to do with this big pile of crushed rock, which eventually led to the Portland cement invention. All right, so the United States Navy has also recently asked me to chair their Navy Consulting Board, which is a group of inventors just like me working on projects for the U.S. Navy, including they've asked me to invent an underwater searchlight and a way of making the ships turn faster, a system for rust-proofing the guns on those big ships. They've asked me to invent a way of detecting submarines under the water. All those devices and more for the Navy. That gives you an idea of the variety of projects I'm working on. I'm not just a light bulb guy. I'm not just an electricity guy. I'm developing inventions designed to make our lives more safe, more economical, more fun, just more. And that is why I am still today known as America's most useful citizen. I thank you very much for spending your afternoon with me. I would be happy to answer a question or two from any of you if you have one. Okay, we're not going to wait until there's at least a couple. Oh, there we go, yes.
Yeah, they just come out with a beautiful new electric car. It's called the Tesla. Why didn't they call it the Edison?
Oh, yeah, you have to bring up him, don't you? Yeah, there was, you may have heard of this argument between me and this Nikola Tesla guy about whether we're having direct current or alternating current. Why did you have to do this to me? Thank you very much. My one big failure, I thought I was revealing my one big failure of an invention with that magnetic ore separator. Tesla ended up winning that argument and realizing that alternating current was perhaps going to be the best electrical system over what I had advocated for, a direct current system. And so yes, his name is coming up a lot lately. Thank you very much. Another question.
Did he ever know a man named Conrad Röntgen in the 1850s that didn't know what it was and he called it an X-ray?
Well,
they were both working on incandescent.
They were, and I sometimes talk a little bit about Edison being involved in X-ray development, and he called it the fluoroscope, not quite the same kind of X-ray that you might be familiar with and have had. And so certainly they were familiar, but I guess the answer is yes. We'll leave it at that for now.
That was so interesting because he turned the switch on, there was no light, and all of a sudden the film that was on the counter turned brown, and he's wondering, how did this happen? I didn't see any light here. And there must be some kind of radiation here. I don't know what it is, so I'll call it X-ray. And that's Conrad Röntgen discovered this, which has revolutionized both broken bones and body
And Edison's version was less film oriented and more of a camera like system that you're actually standing behind the screen, I believe, and sort of looking through the screen, this film like system, slightly different kind of system, but yes, a very similar kind of project. You know, lots of the inventions that Edison worked on were projects that he was competing with others for. Certainly others were working on light bulb inventions similar to his. In fact, when he finished his light bulb, of course, he had this entire system of equipment to make it work, and many of the others just were still working on the light bulb itself, didn't have the entire system of generating and transmitting the electricity. So clearly, lots of competition for many of his inventions. Other questions?
I was going to say, on the light bulbs, they were incandescent, and they've done a lot of experiments with different types of gas, not only the filament in them, where they use neon and freon and all different types of gases to see the effect and the types of light. And some of our new light bulbs that the government has just approved are the type that require less energy, and all of this dates back to...
Well, certainly, and in fact, Edison invented the incandescent light bulb, but there were arc lights before that, which were bright, nasty things. You wouldn't really want to use them in your home. And then I think Edison got the first patent for a fluorescent light as well, with gases and so on. And certainly the whole issue of gases in the bulb was always a big challenge. Not only did you have to get this filament to heat up inside the bulb, you had to extract, sort of create a vacuum inside the bulb in order to get the gas, oxygen in particular, out of the bulb, because that's going to speed up the burning out of the bulb. So clearly lots of challenges involved in those systems. Yes?
I'm curious about that $40,000 that you originally got from trying to get that machine.
From the stock ticker, yes.
Have you any idea what that would be worth in today's dollars?
Yeah, $40,000 in 1869.
Was huge.
Particularly when the guy was 22 years old, he got it. So certainly, I'm sure many millions. You would think. Spent it within 6 months, essentially trying to set himself up with a factory, with an invention factory. All the equipment, a number of buildings, trying to be able to then position himself so he can then go and do whatever else he wanted. That was the thing, he then wanted to be able to invent whatever he wanted, as opposed to working for someone else. And then Edison, I mean, even in real dollars terms, earned his first million by 32 with the invention of the light bulb and the system that goes along with it. So he certainly had his share pretty early on.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Well, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a great day.
What got you started doing this?
What got me started? So I worked for Blackstone Valley Electric Company in Lincoln for 13 years before I came to URI. Last month was my 13th anniversary here, so now I've been here longer than at the electric company. But there was a gentleman at the electric company who had started a program just like this and was getting requests from community groups all over the area. And the day that I started, he quit. And so we had all these requests for programs about Thomas Edison, and nobody to do it. And I guess I was just ham enough to say, okay, I'll do it. And I spent a couple of months learning the program. I was 24 at the time, so I was playing Edison when he was 22 getting that $40,000 check. And then I had subsequently changed the year, as I can't pull off 22 any longer. So when I came here, I was pleased to know that as part of one of my responsibilities here is to coordinate the Speakers Bureau for the university. I get requests from hundreds of community groups around the region looking for speakers, and I set up those speakers and send various URI professors out to speak. And I sign myself up occasionally as well to go out and talk about Thomas Edison. So I've been able to continue to do that for the 13 years that I've been here. In fact, I even got to travel down to Florida a couple times to perform as Thomas Edison for a couple of alumni chapters down there.
Nice.
If you're members of an alumni chapter far away, invite me along.
Only if there's something like Florida.
That's right, that's right. Good, warm temperatures, please. Again, thanks everybody. Have a good day.